Her husband took the farm, the truck, and the savings, but forgot the barn her father left her. What she found inside wasn't just a second chance. It was the truth that would finally set her free. And if you've ever felt like you've lost everything, I want you to stick around, because this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, because we're about to go on a journey, and I have a feeling you'll understand. The pen felt heavy in my hand, heavier than it had any right to be. It was a cheap plastic stick, the kind that comes in a pack of 10, but in that moment, it felt like it was chained to the floor. Mr. Henderson, my father's old lawyer, and now, reluctantly, mine, slid the last page across the polished expanse of his mahogany desk. The wood was dark and smelled of lemon oil and a century of other people's problems. His office was a time capsule of beige wallpaper and dusty law books, a place where life was neatly divided into clauses and subsections. My life, it seemed, was the final, grim appendix. "This is the last one, Maya," he said, his voice gentle but firm, the way you talk to a spooked animal. "This just confirms the division of assets as ruled by the court." Division of assets. It was such a clean, sterile term for what felt like a vivisection. Rick got the house we built together, the one with the porch swing I'd picked out. He got the 100 acres of rolling farmland my grandparents had worked, the land my father had bled for. He got the new Ford F-150, the one we'd bought last year after a good harvest, its payment book now solely in his name. He got the joint savings account, drained down to the last 43 cents. The court called it an equitable distribution, citing his pre-existing ownership of the farm's LLC and my signature on a loan agreement I barely remembered signing. I called it a robbery in broad daylight, sanctioned by a man in a black robe who looked at me with bored pity. I signed. The ink was a flat, dead black against the crisp, white paper. My signature, the one my third-grade teacher taught me to write in looping, hopeful cursive, looked like a stranger's scrawl. With that little flick of my wrist, it was over. 2 years of marriage, a decade of my life poured into that land, all of it gone. I was 26 years old, and my net worth was the clothes on my back and a crushing sense of failure. "All right," Mr. Henderson said, gathering the papers into a neat stack. He avoided my eyes, instead focusing on the precision of aligning the edges. He was a good man, but he was a man of law, and the law had spoken. There was nothing left for him to do for me. The retainer I'd paid him with the last of the money my mother had left me was long gone. I stood up, my chair making a soft, scraping sound on the worn oriental rug. The room felt airless. I just wanted to get outside, to breathe air that didn't smell of defeat. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Henderson." "Maya, wait," he said, and for the first time, he looked directly at me. His eyes were tired, etched with the fine lines of a man who'd seen too many stories like mine. He opened a drawer in his desk, the old wood groaning in protest, and pulled out a single folded document. It was thinner than the others, printed on a different kind of paper, slightly yellowed at the edges. "There's one more thing. It wasn't part of the marital assets. Rick's lawyer didn't even know about it, and frankly, I'd forgotten until I was reviewing your father's old estate files." He pushed it across the desk. It wasn't a thick packet bound by staples. It was just one page, folded into thirds. A quitclaim deed. "Your father filed this about a month before his accident," he explained. "He separated one small parcel from the main property, a single acre on the far west side. He transferred it solely into your name. It's the plot the old barn sits on. It's not worth much." The structure is dilapidated, probably a teardown. The land itself is rocky, no good for planting. He gave a small, apologetic shrug. "Rick gets the farm, but you, and you alone, own the barn. It's yours, free and clear." I stared at the paper. The barn. I hadn't thought about it in years. It was a relic, a gray, sagging structure that stood apart from the main farm buildings, a good quarter-mile from the house. It was the first thing my great-grandfather had built when he bought the land, long before the big red barn and the modern silos went up. My father had used it for storage, for his private workshop, a place he'd go to tinker and be alone. Rick had always called it an eyesore, a waste of space he'd get around to bulldozing one of these days. He'd forgotten it existed, just like he'd forgotten every promise he'd ever made me. I picked up the deed. The paper was thin, almost brittle. It felt like nothing. A piece of paper for a worthless building on a useless patch of dirt. But as my fingers closed around it, a strange, tiny spark flickered in the cold, dead ash of my heart. It was the only thing that was mine. The motel room was a symphony of beige and brown, lit by the sickly yellow glow of a single lamp. The air conditioner rattled in the window, fighting a losing battle against the humid July air and smelling faintly of mildew and desperation. This was my new home. Room 2B at the Sleepy Hollow Motor Inn, situated unironically between a truck stop and a cemetery. For $40 a night, I got a lumpy bed, a television that only got 3 channels, and a view of a dumpster. I sat on the edge of the bed, the scratchy floral bedspread rough against my legs. I'd been there for 3 days, ever since the judge's ruling had made it clear I couldn't go back to the farmhouse. My world had shrunk to the size of this room. My past was a smoking crater, and my future was a terrifying, formless fog. I had $212 in my purse, and a piece of paper that said I owned a falling-down barn. I unfolded the deed and spread it out on the nightstand. Quitclaim deed. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but the important parts were clear. Grantor, Thomas Miller. Grantee, Maya Miller. A legal description of the parcel, a single acre defined by metes and bounds I didn't understand. And my father's signature, strong and sure, right next to the notary's seal. Dated just 4 weeks before his tractor overturned in the south field. He had done this on purpose. It wasn't an afterthought. He had gone to Mr. Henderson's office, paid the filing fee, and legally carved that one small piece of his world away from the rest, handing it to me. Why? He could have just told me he wanted me to have it. He could have put it in his will. But he'd made it a separate legal entity, a tiny island he'd deeded to me while he was still alive. At the time, I was away at community college, and Rick and I had just started getting serious. My dad had never been Rick's biggest fan. He was polite, but there was a reservation in his eyes I'd chosen to ignore. "He's got soft hands for a farm boy," was all he'd ever say, which I'd dismissed as old-fashioned stubbornness. I traced the outline of my father's signature with my fingertip. Thomas Miller. Seeing it felt like a punch to the gut. Grief, sharp and sudden, rose in my throat. It had been 3 years since he died, but in the chaos of the wedding, of trying to keep the farm afloat with Rick, of the slow, painful disintegration of my marriage, I'd never really had the space to just mourn him. I'd packed it all down into a tight, dense ball in my chest. Now, in the silence of this sad little room, it started to unravel. I cried. I cried for my father, for the quiet, steady presence he had been. I cried for my mother, lost to cancer 5 years before him. I cried for the girl I used to be, the one who believed in love and forever and the goodness of the soil. And I cried for the woman I was now, adrift and alone, with nothing to her name but a broken heart and a worthless barn. The barn. The image of it rose in my mind, clearer than it had been in years. The silvered, weathered planks of the walls, the sway-backed roof, patched in places with mismatched sheets of tin, the big double doors that always took a good shoulder to budge. I remembered the smell inside, a mix of dry hay, engine oil, and the sweet, earthy scent of the packed dirt floor. It was my father's sanctuary. When I was a little girl, I'd follow him out there, watching him fix a piece of machinery or patiently sand a piece of wood for some project he was working on. He'd let me help, giving me a bucket of bolts to sort or a rag to wipe down a tool. He never got impatient. He'd just hum a tuneless melody and work, his large, calloused hands moving with a surprising grace. Those hands had built half the things on our farm. They taught me how to bait a hook, how to change a tire, how to tell the difference between a hawk and a vulture circling in the sky. Those hands were strong and capable and gentle. Rick's hands, I thought with a sudden, bitter clarity, were good at scrolling through his phone and signing papers that took everything from me. A wave of anger, hot and clean, washed over me, momentarily clearing the fog of despair. Rick had forgotten the barn. In his rush to consolidate his winnings, to tally up his acres and his assets, that one small, insignificant building had slipped his mind. He'd seen it as a liability, a wreck. He couldn't see the value in anything that didn't have a clear price tag attached. My father had seen something different. He had gone to the trouble of saving it for me. I didn't know why. Maybe it was just sentiment. Maybe he just wanted me to have a piece of the original homestead, a link to the generations that came before. Or maybe it was something more. The thought was a tiny, fragile thing, but it took root. He wasn't a man for empty gestures. I folded the deed carefully and put it in my purse. The rattling of the air conditioner no longer sounded like a death rattle. It sounded like a drumbeat. I had $212. A bus ticket back to my hometown was $22. That left $190. Enough to survive for a few more days. It wasn't a plan, but for the first time in a long time, it was a direction. I was going home, or, at least, to the one part of it that was still mine. The bus ride was a 4-hour journey through a landscape that was painfully familiar. The rolling green hills, the patches of dense forest, the small towns with their single traffic lights and diners advertising all-day breakfast. It was the scenery of my entire life, but seeing it from the smeared window of a Greyhound felt different. I was no longer a part of it. I was just passing through, a ghost haunting her own memories. The other passengers were a quiet, transient bunch, a young soldier in uniform, an elderly woman with a suitcase held together by a bungee cord, a mother trying to quiet a restless toddler. We were all in between places, suspended between a life we'd left and one we hadn't yet found. I got off at the gas station that doubled as the town's bus depot. The air hit me first, thick with humidity, the smell of cut grass, and the faint, sweet scent of cow manure from a nearby dairy. It was the smell of home, and it made my chest ache. I slung my single duffel bag over my shoulder and started walking. The farm was 3 miles out of town. I could have called for a taxi, but I needed the walk. I needed to feel the gravel of the country road under my worn-out sneakers. I needed the slow, deliberate pilgrimage. Each step was a battle. Part of me wanted to turn back, to get on the next bus to anywhere, to leave the past behind. But a stronger, more stubborn part, the part that was my father's daughter, kept putting one foot in front of the other. As I walked, the memories came thick and fast. Learning to ride my bike on this road, my father jogging alongside, his hand a steadying presence on my back. Driving it for the first time with my new license, feeling the terrifying thrill of freedom. Walking it with Rick, hand in hand, planning a future that had turned out to be a mirage. When I reached the turnoff, my heart hammered against my ribs. The long gravel driveway stretched out before me, leading to the farmhouse. Our mailbox, the one my dad and I had built out of fieldstone one summer, was still there, but someone had painted over our name, Miller, with a sloppy, black Thompson. Rick's last name. It felt like a desecration. I could see the house in the distance. It looked the same, but different. Colder. The flower beds I'd so carefully tended were overgrown with weeds. Rick's new, shiny black truck was parked where my old sedan used to be. I felt a surge of nausea. This wasn't my home anymore. It was enemy territory. My path wasn't to the house. My path was to the left, a barely there track that cut across the west pasture. Towards the barn. I slipped through the familiar gap in the fence, the wire groaning as I pushed it aside. The grass was high, brushing against my jeans, soaking them with dew. The air was buzzing with the sound of cicadas, the soundtrack to every summer I had ever known. And then I saw it. The barn stood silhouetted against the afternoon sun, exactly as I remembered it, only more so. More tired, more weathered, more forgotten. The gray wood had bleached to an almost white in places. The roof sagged more deeply in the middle, like a tired old man's shoulders. A shutter on the hayloft window hung by a single hinge, swinging slightly in the breeze. It looked sad and lonely, but it also looked defiant. It was still standing. After all the storms, all the winters, all the neglect, it was still there. Just like me. My steps slowed as I got closer. I half expected Rick to come storming out of the house, yelling at me for trespassing. But the house remained silent. He was probably in town, at the bar, celebrating his victory. I reached the huge double doors. The paint was peeling in long, curling strips. A heavy chain and a brand-new, rust-proof padlock held them shut. Rick's padlock. Of course. Even in his forgetting, he had made sure to lock it up. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. He'd locked up a building full of junk, not realizing he was locking me out of the only thing I had left. But I knew this barn. I knew its secrets. Or at least, I thought I did. I walked around to the side, to the small man door my father had used most of the time. It was also locked with a new, matching padlock. Frustration pricked at me. I was so close. I ran my hand over the rough wood of the door, and my fingers brushed against the frame. And then I remembered. My dad was a practical man. He believed in belts and suspenders. He locked things, but he always had a backup. "Never lock yourself out, Maya girl," he used to say. "Always have a key to your own kingdom." My eyes scanned the top of the doorframe. Tucked deep into the shadows, covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs, was a small, rusty nail. And hanging from it was an old iron key. His key. Rick, in his haste, had only secured the doors. He hadn't bothered to check for the old ways in. My heart leaped. With trembling fingers, I lifted the key off the nail. It was cold and heavy in my palm. I wiped the grime off on my jeans and slid it into the old original lock set just below Rick's shiny new one. It resisted for a moment, stiff from disuse. I held my breath, jiggled it gently, and then, with a satisfying, deep-throated clunk, the lock turned. The door swung inward with a low groan, opening into darkness. I stepped inside, out of the bright sun, and into the cool, dim interior. The air was thick with the smell I remembered so well. Old wood, dry earth, faint traces of oil and dust. It was the smell of my father. For a moment, I just stood there, letting my eyes adjust, breathing it in. Sunbeams lanced through the gaps in the walls, illuminating swirling columns of dust motes. The place was a mess, filled with the detritus of a lifetime. Old tarps, broken pieces of farm equipment, stacks of lumber, coffee cans full of nuts and bolts. To Rick, it was junk. To my father, it was potential. I walked deeper into the cavernous space, my footsteps silent on the packed dirt floor. My gaze swept over the cluttered workbench that ran along the far wall. His tools were still there, hanging from their hooks, outlined in white paint so he'd know if one was missing. A half-finished birdhouse sat on the corner of the bench, a fine layer of dust covering the smooth, sanded wood. He must have been working on it right before he died. The sight of it was another stab of grief, so sharp I had to brace myself against the workbench. This was a mausoleum, a monument to a life cut short. What was I doing here? What had I expected to find? Sentimental value didn't pay the rent at the Sleepy Hollow Motor Inn. Disappointment, cold and familiar, began to seep into my bones. My father had saved this place for me, yes, but maybe it was just that, a gesture. A final, futile attempt to give me something, anything, to hold on to. My eyes drifted to the floor near the workbench. It was mostly packed earth, but my father had laid down a section of rough wooden planking in his main work area. And I saw it. One board, near the corner, was a slightly different color. The nail heads in it weren't as rusted as the others. I remembered being a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, helping him organize his coffee cans of screws. I'd dropped one, and it had rolled under the workbench. When I'd tried to reach for it, my fingers had brushed against the edge of a loose board. He had seen me, and instead of getting annoyed, he had smiled. He knelt down, pried up the board with his fingers, and retrieved the can for me. "That's our little secret spot," he'd whispered, his voice a low rumble. "For hiding treasures." He'd winked at me, and we'd never spoken of it again. My breath caught in my throat. A secret spot, for hiding treasures. I knelt down, my knees pressing into the dusty floorboards. I wedged my fingers into the same crack I'd found as a child. The board resisted. It had been years. I pulled harder, my nails scraping against the wood. It gave a little, then a little more, and then it came up, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity beneath the floor. It wasn't empty. Nestled in the cool, dark earth was a metal box. It was an old Army surplus ammunition can, painted olive drab, with a sturdy latch on the front. It wasn't large, but it was heavy. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. This was it. This was something. This was not just a sentimental gesture. With trembling hands, I lifted the box out of the hole. It was heavier than I expected. I set it on the workbench, the metal clanging softly in the quiet barn. Dust puffed up around it. The latch was stiff, but not locked. I took a deep, shaky breath, as if I were about to dive into deep water. I flipped the latch. It sprang open with a loud snap that echoed in the silence. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a thick, manila envelope sealed with wax. My name was written on the front in my father's familiar, blocky handwriting. Maya. Just my name. Beneath the envelope, there was something else, something wrapped in oilcloth. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely function. I set the oilcloth-wrapped object aside and picked up the envelope. The wax seal was stamped with the head of a screw, a little joke from my dad, the handyman. His mark. I broke the seal. My fingers fumbled as I pulled out a letter, several pages thick, written on simple, lined paper. I unfolded it. "My dearest Maya girl," it began. The tears started before I even reached the second line. I sank onto a nearby wooden crate, the rough wood digging into my legs, and began to read. If you are reading this, it means a couple of things. First, it means I'm gone. And for that, I am more sorry than you will ever know. I hope it was quick, and I hope I didn't leave too big of a mess. Second, it means you found my little hiding spot. I always knew you were a smart girl. You never forgot a thing. I'm writing this because there are things I should have told you, things that are hard to say out loud. Things about the farm, about the future, about why I've done what I've done. I have a bad feeling, Maya, a knot in my gut that won't go away. Things aren't as they seem. The farm is in trouble. I know you've heard the whispers, seen the worry on my face. I've let you and everyone else believe it's my fault. Bad decisions, a couple of poor seasons, getting older. It's easier that way. But that's not the whole truth. The truth is, we're being squeezed. A company out of the city, a development group called Apex Holdings, wants this land. They want all of it, from here to the river. They're buying up the small farms one by one, and for the ones who won't sell, they have other methods. They lean on the banks. They influence the co-op. They make it impossible to turn a profit, impossible to get a fair price, impossible to get a loan. They bleed you dry until you have no choice but to sell to them for pennies on the dollar. I've been fighting them, quietly, but I'm losing. And I've seen the way their point man looks at this place. The way he looks at you. That's the part that keeps me up at night. His name is Rick Thompson. I stopped reading. The name hit me like a physical blow. Rick. My Rick? No, it couldn't be. He was a local boy. His family had lived in the next county for generations. He'd worked for a grain supplier. That's how we'd met. He'd been charming, ambitious. He'd commiserated with my father about the plight of the small farmer. He'd been on our side, hadn't he? My hands were shaking violently now. I forced myself to keep reading, a sense of dread coiling in my stomach. He works for them, Maya. He's their local man, the friendly face they use to get in the door. He's been feeding them information about our operation, our finances, our weak spots, for the better part of a year. I found out by accident. Overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. By then, you were already smitten with him. And I saw the way you looked at him. You were happy. After losing your mom, seeing you smile like that, I couldn't bring myself to break your heart. I thought I could handle him. I thought I could protect you and the farm both. I was a fool. I'm so sorry. I should have warned you. I should have trusted you with the truth. My pride got in the way. I wanted to be the father who could fix everything. But I can't fix this. I think they're going to win. I think they're going to take this farm. But they will not take everything. This barn, this 1 acre, is on a separate deed. It was the first piece of land your great-grandfather bought, paid for in cash. It's never had a mortgage against it, never been tied up in the farm's LLC. It's clean. I've transferred it to you. It is yours, and yours alone. No bank, no creditor, no future husband can touch it. It's your fallback, your fortress. It's not much, but it's a piece of ground that belongs to you, no matter what happens. Inside this box, you'll find some things to help you. A foundation. The object wrapped in oilcloth is a key. It's not for a door. Look up. The real inheritance isn't the land, Maya girl. It's the truth. And the choice of what to do with it. Whatever you've been through, whatever has happened, know this. I love you more than words can say. Be strong. Be smart. Be my daughter. All my love, Dad. The letter fell from my fingers. The world tilted on its axis. The quiet, dusty barn seemed to spin around me. Rick. It was all a lie. Our whole life together. A lie. He hadn't loved me. He had targeted me. I was an asset, a means to an end. The charming courtship, the whirlwind wedding, his help with the farm's finances after my dad died. It was all a calculated strategy. He had played the long game, waiting for my father to fall, and when he did, Rick was there to step in, the concerned partner, guiding me toward decisions that would ultimately strip me of everything and hand the farm to him, and by extension, to Apex Holdings. A guttural sob tore from my throat, raw and animalistic. It was a sound of such profound betrayal that it scared me. I collapsed onto the dirt floor, the dust puffing up around me, and I wept. I wept for my father's lonely, secret battle. I wept for his misplaced pride and his fierce, desperate love. I wept for my own blindness, my own stupid, naive heart that had refused to see the truth right in front of me. The man I had married, the man I had loved and trusted, was a monster. He hadn't just taken my farm, he had stolen my life, my history, my trust, and he'd done it with a smile. The anger came next, a white-hot inferno that burned away the tears. It was so pure, so potent, it made me feel dizzy. I wanted to destroy something. I wanted to drive to the farmhouse and confront him, to scream and rage and claw his lying eyes out. But my father's words echoed in my head. Be smart. Rage was a fire that would consume me first. I needed to be cold. I needed to be strategic. I needed to be my father's daughter. I sat there on the floor of the barn for a long time, the sunbeams shifting across the room as the afternoon wore on. The air grew cooler. The initial shock wore off, leaving behind a hard, dense core of purpose. My grief wasn't gone, but it had been transformed. It was now fuel. If you've made it this far, thank you. This part of my story, this moment, was the absolute bottom. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where the truth hits you so hard it rearranges your soul. Where you find out that everything you believed to be true was a lie. If you have, I want you to know you're not alone. So many of us have stories of betrayal, of having the rug pulled out from under us. And it's in those moments that we find out who we really are. If this is resonating with you, I want to invite you to be part of this community. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to rebuild from zero. Your story matters. Now, let's get back to the barn, because my father had left me one more thing. A key. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs stiff. I wiped my tear-streaked face with the back of my hand, leaving a smear of dirt on my cheek. I looked at the object still sitting on the workbench, wrapped in greasy oilcloth. A key. It's not for a door. Look up. I looked up. The ceiling of the barn was a cathedral of rafters and beams, disappearing into the shadows 20 feet above me. Directly above the workbench, a heavy crossbeam ran the width of the barn. And chained to it, almost invisible in the gloom, was an old metal strongbox. It was bolted directly to the beam, a heavy-duty, fireproof safe, the kind people use for important documents. It was completely inaccessible from the ground. How had he even gotten it up there? Then I saw it. Tucked away in a corner was the old block and tackle system he used for lifting engines. The ropes were frayed, but the pulleys were solid. He must have hoisted it up there himself, late at night, and bolted it in place where no one would ever think to look. A bank vault in the sky. But how to get to it? There was a ladder leading to the hayloft, and from the loft, the beam was closer. I took a deep breath and started to climb. The wooden rungs were solid under my feet. The hayloft was even dustier than the ground floor, filled with a few rotting bales of hay that smelled sweet and musty. From here, the strongbox was only about 10 feet away, but it was a straight shot across open air to the beam. There was no way to walk it. My eyes scanned the loft. My father never did anything without a plan. There had to be a way. Then I saw it, leaning against the far wall. A long, wide, sturdy-looking plank. The kind used for scaffolding. It was heavy, but I managed to drag it across the loft floor. My plan was simple and terrifying. I would lay the plank from the edge of the loft to the crossbeam, creating a makeshift bridge. My heart hammered as I pushed the plank out into the empty space. It landed on the beam with a solid, reassuring thunk. It looked stable enough. Maybe. I took the oilcloth-wrapped key from my pocket and unwrapped it. It was a skeleton key, but a complex one, with a double-bitted head. Heavy and intricate. I clenched it in my hand. This was it. Getting onto the plank was the hardest part. My body screamed at me that this was a terrible idea. The ground was a long way down. But the image of Rick's smiling, treacherous face filled my mind, and the anger gave me courage. I took a deep breath and stepped out onto the plank. It held. I kept my eyes fixed on the strongbox, not daring to look down. I took one slow, shuffling step, then another. The plank was wider than it looked. It was stable. I was my father's daughter, and he wouldn't have left me a task I couldn't handle. I reached the beam, my hands shaking as I straddled it, my legs wrapped around the thick, rough wood for stability. I was face to face with the box. The lock was old and rusted, but the keyhole was clean. He must have oiled it. I slid the key in. It was a perfect fit. I turned it, and with a series of loud, satisfying clicks, the lock disengaged. The heavy door of the strongbox swung open. My breath caught. It wasn't filled with jewels or gold bars. It was better. It was filled with paper. On top was another letter, a short one this time. This is the ammunition. Don't use it unless you have to. Running is an option. Starting over is an option. But if you choose to fight, this is your sword and your shield. The choice is yours, Maya girl. Always yours. Beneath the note were 2 stacks of items. On the left was a thick, plastic-wrapped brick of cash. $100 bills. I couldn't even guess how much was there. Tens of thousands, maybe more. A foundation, he had called it. This was the money he'd been skimming from the farm's profits for years, hiding it not from the IRS, but from Apex Holdings. Hiding it for me. It was a ticket to a new life, anywhere I wanted to go. Freedom in a stack of paper. But it was the stack on the right that made my blood run cold. It was a series of folders, account ledgers from the farm showing the real profits before the squeeze began, copies of loan applications that had been mysteriously denied, correspondence from the co-op showing how their prices had systematically dropped, but only for him and a few other holdouts. And at the bottom, there was a small digital voice recorder. I picked it up. My fingers fumbled with the tiny buttons. I hit play. The sound of my father's voice filled the barn, not in a letter, but his real voice, tinny and strained from the cheap recorder. It was a conversation. "I don't understand, Rick," my father was saying. "Another 2 points on the interest rate? The bank promised me a fixed rate." Then another voice, Rick's voice, smooth, confident, and utterly chilling. "Things change, Tom. The market's volatile. Apex is making a very generous offer. Maybe it's time to stop fighting the current and just let go." "This isn't the market," my dad's voice was sharp, angry. "This is you. This is them. I know you work for them. I heard you at the diner, talking to their man from the city." There was a pause. Then Rick's voice, no longer friendly, but cold as ice. "You shouldn't have heard that. You're a stubborn old man, and it's going to cost you everything. It would be a shame if something were to happen. An accident. Farms are dangerous places. Now, you're going to forget this conversation, and you're going to take the offer. Or I'll take it all, and I'll make sure Maya is happy to hand it to me." The recording ended. I sat there, straddling the beam high above the barn floor, the recorder clutched in my hand, my knuckles white. A threat. It was a direct threat. Farms are dangerous places. 4 weeks later, my father was dead. An accident. The tractor overturned. The sheriff had ruled it accidental. But was it? The cash in the box was a way out. The smart choice, the safe choice, was to take that money, disappear, and never look back. Let Rick have his tainted victory. Let him have the farm. My father had given me that option. Running is an option. But he had also given me another. This is your sword and your shield. The ledgers, the letters, the recording. It was proof, not just of the predatory business practices, but of extortion. And maybe, just maybe, of something far worse. It wouldn't bring my father back. It wouldn't erase the betrayal. But it could bring the truth to light. It could clear my father's name. It could stop Rick and Apex Holdings from doing this to another family. I thought about the man who had taught me to sort bolts and sand wood. The man who hummed while he worked, who believed in having a key to your own kingdom. He had fought and lost. He had died thinking he had failed to protect me. But he hadn't failed. He had left me a choice. He had left me the tools. He had left me this barn, this fortress of truth. He had left me his legacy, not of land, but of courage. Sitting there, high in the rafters of the old, forgotten barn, I made my choice. I wasn't going to run. I was going to fight. The descent from the beam felt different. I was no longer shaky or afraid. Every movement was deliberate, filled with a cold, clear purpose. I packed the contents of the strongbox, the cash, the ledgers, the recorder, into my duffel bag. I placed the loose floorboard back in its spot, leaving the empty ammo can in the darkness where it had waited for me. I walked out of the barn, pulling the man door shut, listening for the soft click of the old lock. I didn't bother putting the key back on the nail. It was my key now. I walked back down the gravel driveway, not bothering to hide. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. It was beautiful, and for the first time, I felt like I could see the beauty again. I didn't look at the house. It was just a building on a piece of land. It held no power over me anymore. My first stop was not the motel. My first stop was a payphone outside the gas station. My cell phone had been on the family plan with Rick, and it had been shut off days ago. I dug in my pocket for a quarter, the cool metal a small anchor in my palm. I dialed the number I knew by heart, the number for Mr. Henderson's home office. He picked up on the third ring. Henderson speaking. Mr. Henderson, it's Maya Miller. There was a pause. Maya, are you all right? Where are you? I'm in town, and I'm better than all right, I said, and I was surprised by the strength in my own voice. I need to see you, right now. It's about my father. It's about the farm. It's about everything. It's after 7, Maya, he started, his voice weary. I have evidence, Mr. Henderson. I cut him off, my voice low and intense. I have proof that the farm's failure was orchestrated. I have proof of extortion. And I have a recording of Rick Thompson threatening my father a month before he died. The line went silent. I could hear the faint sound of his breathing. When he finally spoke, the weariness was gone, replaced by the sharp, focused tone of a lawyer who smelled blood in the water. Where are you? He asked again. Don't move. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The months that followed were a blur of legal meetings, depositions, and strategy sessions. Mr. Henderson, revitalized by the fight, was a bulldog. The recording was the bombshell that blew the case wide open. It prompted the sheriff's department to reopen the investigation into my father's death. While they could never prove definitively that Rick had tampered with the tractor, the threat on the recording, combined with the financial evidence, was enough. Apex Holdings, faced with a massive lawsuit and a criminal investigation into their practices, settled. They wanted to avoid a public trial at all costs. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. I didn't get the whole farm back. Most of it was already slated for development, part of a complex web of contracts. Rick, facing charges of extortion and conspiracy, had already sold his interest and disappeared. Last I heard, he was waiting tables in a different state, his ambitions reduced to asking people if they wanted fries with that. But I got a settlement, a significant one. Enough to give my father's name the justice it deserved. And I got to keep my acre, my barn. The first thing I did with the money was hire a crew. Not to tear the barn down, but to restore it. We jacked up the roof and replaced the sagging beams. We put on new, galvanized tin that shone in the sun. We replaced the rotten planks and installed new windows that let the light flood in. We poured a concrete floor, but I left the patch of earth under my father's workbench, right over his secret spot, untouched. It's been 2 years now. I'm writing this from a table inside that barn. It's not a barn anymore. It's my home. It's my workshop. The main floor is a bright, open living space filled with comfortable furniture and the smell of fresh coffee. The hayloft is my studio, where I build custom furniture from reclaimed wood, just like my dad used to. His old tools hang on the wall, cleaned and sharpened, and I use them every day. I sell my pieces online and to people in town who appreciate things that are built to last. I didn't get the farm, but I got something more valuable. I got the truth. I got my strength back. I learned that inheritance isn't always about what you're given. It's about what you choose to do with it. My father didn't leave me a piece of property. He left me a foundation. He left me a choice. He left me the story of his love, hidden in the bones of an old building. This barn is more than my home. It's a monument to a quiet man's courage. It's a testament to the fact that even when you think everything is lost, there can be one thing left, one forgotten corner, one secret place that holds the key to your future. You just have to be brave enough to go back and find it. So I want to end by asking you this. What is your barn? What is that one thing in your life, that memory, that skill, that relationship that you've overlooked, but that might hold the foundation for your own second chance? Think about it. And if this story gave you a little bit of hope, please hit that subscribe button and join our community. I read all the comments and I believe in the power of sharing our stories. Because sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the places no one else thinks to look. Thank you for listening.